Welcome back to the NYU Stern Center for Sustainable Business 5th Annual Practice Forum. We had a great first day of programming and are excited to continue the discussion and highlight more of the latest research in sustainability. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Glenmead, Invest Industrial, JLL, SAP, and our media partner, Harvard Business Review. As a reminder, today's events are on the record and will be recorded. Media is in attendance and we will be sharing information on social media. If you need support to navigate the event platform, feel free to reach out to our team at sustainablebusiness@stern.nyu.edu. Please direct questions to the Q&A function on the right side of your screen and engage with fellow participants via the chat. Without delay, I'm pleased to introduce our first panel, Becoming Net Positive, with former Unilever CEO and author, Paul Polman. Paul has been a longtime leader in corporate sustainability, both at the helm of Unilever for 10 years and in his current role as founder and CEO of Imagine, a nonprofit which aims to help businesses become net positive. His recent book, Net Positive, How Courageous Companies Thrive by Giving More Than They Take, co-authored with Andrew Winston, is available to conference attendees courtesy of Harvard Business Review at a discount with the code NETPOSITIVE30. Please refer to the chat for a link and promotional code. A longtime friend of CSB, please welcome Paul Polman in conversation with Director of NYU Stern Center for Sustainable Business, Tensie Whelan.
Thank you so much, Allison, and welcome, Paul. It's terrific to be with you. So glad you can be with us. And Allison, I just want to check, is the slide still up? Can we take that down? Thanks so much. Terrific. So, Paul, it's been a tough year, a tough couple of years. And you, during this time, have been very busy leading the new organization you founded, Imagine, and also co-authoring a book with Andrew Winston around net positive, right? Why did you write this book? Why is this message of net positive important right now?
Yeah, no, thanks, Tensie, and obviously great fun to see you again and in good health and spirit, and thanks for the opportunity. And also what you do with the Center for Sustainable Business. I've been following it directly and indirectly from a not too distant distance, if you want to, and really want to congratulate you on the work you're doing and on changing the mindsets that need to be changed. And that probably brings us to the book as well. I never wanted to write a book, to be honest. I was a little bit biased. I felt that every CEO, as soon as he stepped down, the ones who wrote books was about changing the history or stroking their egos, and none of that was appealing to me. But Adi Ignatius and Jeff Kehoe from Harvard Business Press, and that you know well, they convinced me and said, you need to put your thinking into practice and what you've done and what you've learned, the good things, the bad things, and perhaps have a little bit of a peek in the future. So the book that we wrote is a very practical book on how to implement really a net positive company. And what we call net positive is companies that profit from solving the world's problems, not creating the world's problems. When we ask a very simple question, is the world better off because your company is in it or not? Our premises are a few of them. The first one is, since World War II, we've seen output increase by 12 times. We've seen population grow by 3 times. That has been a tremendous success in lifting people out of poverty. But we are increasingly discovering that our linear extractive production model simply isn't working. This planet is 4.6 billion years old. And for the simplicity of the audience, I'll put it at 46 years. In these 46 years, human beings have only been around for 4 hours. The Industrial Revolution started 1 minute ago, and in that 1 minute, we have cut down half the world's forests. In the last 5 decades, we've lost 68% of our species, reptiles, mammals, and birds. When is it our turn? Last year, July Overshoot Day, which is the day that we use up more resources than the planet can replenish, was July 29th. I would argue that after that day, every day after, we're actually stealing from future generations. Now, normally we had functioning governments that would take care of all these issues, functioning global institutions, multilateral institutions, if you want to. The reality is these global institutions haven't adapted to their times. They were all created at the time of Bretton Woods, 1944, and frankly, they don't function that well anymore. At that time, 90% of the world's economy was Europe and the US. It's dramatically changed now. Countries, because we haven't addressed these basic issues of inequality, climate change, and other things, increasingly people have elected the populists, the nationalists, the xenophobics. In fact, in about 100 countries, we've seen democracy come down. So the starting premise of the book is don't rely on governments or multilateral institutions to solve your problems moving forward. And then the business community really has a direct interest in stepping in. Business cannot succeed in societies that fail, nor do I believe that they can be bystanders in a system that gives them life in the first place. So responsible business has to actually de-risk that political process. They are moving in the right direction. Most companies understand there is climate change. Most companies understand that inequality isn't good, and are moving, probably more so than they've ever done before. But the reality is, Tensie, still individually and collectively, we're not moving at the scale and speed that is needed to address these issues. So this book is trying to reframe your mindset and moving companies from CSR, corporate social responsibility, to what we call RSC, responsible social responsible social corporations. Currently, if you have been to the COP26, or if you read CSR reports of the many companies that are now issuing them, it's all about being less bad. I will reduce my plastics in the ocean by this percentage, my carbon emissions so far, my deforestation by 20%. So it's all about being less bad. But in a world that has overshot these boundaries, less bad is simply not good enough anymore. I used to kill 10 people. Now I only kill 5 people. Am I a better murderer? It doesn't work anymore. Then people say, I get it. I need to be sustainable. These famous net zero targets, neither good nor bad. Admirable, but still not enough in a world that has overshot its planetary boundaries. So the companies that are going to be successful in the future are the companies that think net positive, restorative, reparative. And that is what we call net positive, how courageous companies thrive by giving more than they take. And these business models have 5 characteristics, and then I'll hand it back to you. The first one is really take responsibility of your total impact in society, all consequences intended or not. Many companies still stay in scope 1 and 2 only. They say they don't have visibility of their value chain, or they believe they can outsource their value chain and also outsource their responsibilities. That doesn't work anymore. These companies operate for the longer term. They know that these issues like climate change, inequality, etc., need a long-term solution. By operating under the long term, they try to optimize the return for all of their stakeholders, not just myopically maximizing the return for shareholders. In fact, these companies believe firmly that the shareholder return is a result of what they do, not an objective. And last but not least, these companies work on the broader transformation of society, because optimizing within a current system that frankly is not anymore designed to deliver doesn't quite work anymore. So they participate in the broader things that need to be addressed, including with government and civil society. What makes the book interesting is it's as much about a personal transformation to lead to your company's transformation, and then taking you into the broader systems transformation. But at the end, it also doesn't shy away from some of the tougher challenges that CEOs face, not least the challenge to be consistent. And we talk about some elephants in the room, like corruption, money in politics, CEO salaries, tax payments, human rights, trade associations, arguing different things than what you stand for publicly. And these things need to increasingly fit together to become a net positive company. The companies that move into that direction, and increasingly we see signs on that, there's increasing evidence that they are better placed, and the ones that don't, I believe, are already heading to the graveyard of dinosaurs.
I hope you're right about that last point, Paul. And thanks so much for walking us through that. Could you give us a specific example, sort of walk us through how a transformation, it could be around a particular product, et cetera, but it'd be great to bring this whole sort of evolution and transformation to life for us.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is if you look at it and you start a company, you first have to figure out why you are here in the first place. That is really coming back to purpose. Colin Meyer, in his book Prosperity, called it to profitably address the issues of people and planet. But what's your reason for being? And you cannot define your purpose very well in a company if you don't have a purpose yourself, just like you can't be sustainable as a company if you're not sustainable yourself. So spend some time first on creating awareness of what the issues are in the world and how you individually and collectively as employees of your company are planning to address them. It's very important to do that higher order because that should be at the core of your strategy. It also gives you a direction in uncertain times. It gives you the courage to make bolder targets. Then the second thing, not surprisingly, is you take responsibility of your total impact, as I said. So that's why you need a strong purpose and that courage. Take responsibility of your total impact, measure where that impact is, and decide where you're going to make a difference. Set clear targets, make these targets public. You'll find out that because you're setting bold objectives of what the world needs, not objectives of what you can get away with, but beside these bold objectives, that you need partnerships to solve many of them. And once you have these partnerships going, I think you get into that virtuous circle of creating that positive energy, that purpose-driven energy that engages employees, that makes yourself an employer brand, that strengthens your relationships in your whole value chain, makes you ultimately more innovative. And all of that, as you've shown with many times with your research, gets you into better results for your shareholders as well. So practically for Unilever, that means we went back to the history of the company. Lord Lever started it at the end of the 19th century, making hygiene commonplace. In Victorian Britain, 1 out of 2 babies didn't make it either past year 1 in Britain because of issues of hygiene. He wanted to address that. He invented the bar soap, more or less. At that time, he was already talking about shared prosperity, which you now translate as multiple stakeholders. So we translated that in today's world, and we said make sustainable living commonplace. That was quite a big vision. We also then put a plan behind that took responsibility for our total impact. That was known as the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, basically decoupling our growth from environmental impact, maximizing our overall social impact, hitting all the variables of ESG. Put 50 targets behind that. Some people say that's quite a lot, but I felt that at a time that trust in business was low, making these targets more public not only resulted in creating partnerships, but also in getting a lot of credibility and trust that was needed to be ultimately successful. And then it's hard work to start implementing that, first in your own company to earn a seat at the table, then in your value chain, working with suppliers and all that. We had wonderful programs like Partner to Win and other things to support that. And then at the broad ecosystem, I think the bigger challenge is how do you drive the broader systems change? You put a factory in Indonesia, but the factory is powered by coal because that's the only source. Then you still have carbon emission in your value chain. You need to work with governments to solve these things. You source palm oil and there's deforestation in your value chain. That's a bad thing. I don't think we want that anymore, but you need to work with the industry and governments to change that, just like you need to do, let's say, on plastics in the oceans. So you get to these broader partnerships where you increasingly become a societal leader. And if you are at that sweet spot, then you're influencing the direction the world needs to go. You're making positive contributions. People want to keep you around and opportunities abound. Most powerfully, last sentence, is when you can integrate it into your brands. Most of the brands are driven by profit and growth, and both of them are probably to some extent unsustainable. But what if you bring in purpose into these brands? A brand like Domestos, which is a toilet bowl cleaner, set as a goal to build 100 million toilets to address the issues of open defecation. Became incredibly innovative. You call it a sustainable brand. And in line with your research, they grew twice as fast and they were also more profitable. A brand like Dove, starting to work for women's self-esteem, setting a goal to reach 100 million girls in schools to build their self-confidence. A brand like Lifebuoy, which is a bar soap, really helping a child reach the age of 5 in a world where still 4 million children die every year of infectious diseases like pneumonia, diarrhea, that can be prevented by a simple act of hand washing. So we set a goal to reach 1 billion people with hand washing. Long story short, these audacious goals resulted in a much quicker achievement, not all of it, but much closer to these goals than we otherwise would have had. And they propelled the company into becoming a employer of desire, high engagement scores, faster growth than the industry, 300% shareholder return over the 10 years. So I think we've shown that business can be done differently, focused on the billions of people that we need to serve, not the few billionaires, and create value through values. And that very much is the direction I think we need to take for all of the industries to make society, make capitalism work if you want to. And that's what we call the move towards net positive.
I remember working with your team when you first announced your sustainable living plan targets. I was running the Rainforest Alliance and I was on the Sustainable Agriculture Sourcing Board. And your team everywhere was, oh my goodness, how are we going to meet these audacious goals, right? And I bring that up because one of the things that I hear from CEOs is the concern that if I set very high targets and don't meet them, I will be attacked, right? And so therefore we see kind of low expectations, low goal setting, et cetera. And also, so that's one thing I wanted to get your thoughts on and advice to CEOs, how to navigate that concern. The other question I have for you, which you have navigated both at Unilever and now with Imagine, is this question that CEOs are wrestling with, which is around, when do I stand up and take a position on political issues, right? And also, one of the things that we're seeing is that companies may take stands in certain ways on political issues and do, as you alluded to, something different with their lobbying organization, right? So I'd love to get your advice to CEOs on navigating these sort of challenging situations right now in real time.
Okay, I'm writing them down, Tensie. So because there are probably 3 or 4 questions in it, I'll try to keep it short. I would advise the CEOs, if you set targets you can get away with, and that often already you know how to achieve, then these targets are not aggressive enough. Frankly, if the targets don't make you more uncomfortable, you are not changing your company. You're basically doing what your company was projecting to do anyway, and you'll lose your competitiveness very quickly. But more importantly, you'll not be seen seriously by society. If you don't make targets now on climate change that are not in line with the Paris Agreement to stay below 1.5 degrees, I think you're going to run a major risk to be attacked by your own employees. We're seeing the great resignation, the walkouts, a risk of being attacked by the shareholders increasingly. $130 trillion of money under management with the Glasgow Financial Alliance on net zero made commitments to decarbonize their portfolios. You're going to be attacked by consumers of this world who increasingly want to buy from companies that are providing solutions to the challenges, not make the challenges worse. So interestingly, if you set these more audacious targets, like we set targets already 12 years, 13 years ago of zero carbon emission in our own operations, which we have achieved as one of the first companies, zero waste in our factories, for example, implementation of the human rights standards in our value chain, the Ruggie frameworks that you're familiar with. We never got attacked. In fact, the opposite happened. They said, yeah, it's awfully tough, but these are the right targets. They stretch the mind. They create broader frameworks for your company to operate in. And more importantly, it makes you real, makes you human as a company, and people want to work with you. They don't want to work with people that they know are undershooting what the world needs. So by definition, setting these low targets, I think, results in increasing exposure. What we found was not achieving all these targets. Without any doubt, we missed some as well, but they were so aggressive that the world accepts that because they see that you've made so much more progress than if you would have set low targets. That we said we would be 100% sustainably sourced, and frankly, I apologize. I only achieved 85%, but it took Unilever over 100 years to achieve 10%, and they got all the prizes for having started the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative or the round tables of sustainable palm oil or the marine stewardship. We only had 10% sustainable sourcing. Moving that now up to 85%, we should feel broadly good about. And the other 15% requires governments of Brazil or or others in this world to cooperate, or sometimes you don't have a big enough share to move these markets. But the goals should not change for that. They should be real. So coming to your second point is the issues itself and lobbying. 85% of the population now expect CEOs to speak out on issues of relevance. I always say, obviously, if it deals with your company and the future of your company, let's say Brexit here in the UK, where I'm calling from, this has major consequences on businesses. It's your responsibility to speak out and make people understand what the effects are on your businesses. Implementing the Sustainable Development Goals and ensuring that governments spend money behind that to achieve these famous 17 goals is in the interest of business to advocate for that, because it creates an environment where business would do better. But increasingly also on the political issues, where these basic human values are being eroded, like dignity and respect for everybody, equity, compassion. It's incredibly important to speak out. So when you get an event like the January 6th event in the US, then it's important that CEOs say, no, we need to respect the results of this election. We need to stop supporting people with financial contributions that still don't accept the outcome. We need to look at money in politics and what that really does to our democratic process. This whole Citizens United that has crept into the US has really moved you away from a democracy by taking away this firm principle that our forefathers had with the Constitution of one citizen, one vote. And I know they excluded at that time some citizens, but today they would not. But it is not $1 one vote or $1 million a few more votes. So companies are being held to higher standards now. You see it in the Ukraine now, with the terrible war unfolding not far from here, is that companies actually that went proactively first into saying, I pull my businesses from Russia, and I don't want to finance a regime that is committing atrocities that we haven't seen since World War II, are actually getting rewarded. The companies that stayed and sort of took a halfway position, or let's wait, or maybe, or I'll do a little bit, but not much, these companies actually saw their market value go down. So increasingly, even the financial market is understanding that this is a sign of how resilient a company is, how much they position themselves for the future, how important reputation has become. 85% of a company's value is now in intangibles. And so how a company behaves, how the culture is, what values it has, is ultimately a bigger driver now of a company's values.
Thank you, Paul.
Interestingly, my final sentence on that too. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say I have a couple of questions from the audience, but did you want to finish your thought? Or should I?
No, go ahead. We'll
okay.
get to that perhaps later.
Great. So perfect. Let's see. Paul, how do you see the current inflationary environment and resource-constrained world, exacerbated by the current conflict in Ukraine, impacting the trajectory and evolution of sustainability and ESG in the corporate world?
Apologies. When COVID came along, people said the world would go back to the same behavior as we saw in the financial crisis. That was about 12 years before. And during the financial crisis, we saw companies going back to the short term. We saw governments going back to the short term. In fact, all the money was spent to bail out the banks, who frankly had caused the problem in the first place. And people said banks were too big to fail and people were too small to matter. And we refused to address these basic issues that were underlying all of this. We did not green the global society. We did not solve the issues of inequality. We've seen further accelerated emissions of carbon. We have seen dissatisfaction at the polls, people in the streets. We created an issue that was bigger than I think we are increasingly seeing that we can handle. Then COVID came. And with COVID, something interesting happened, because for the first time, people realized how many of these things are connected. COVID itself should not have been a surprise. It's one of the other zoonotic diseases, like of which we have had many already. We've had SARS, Zika, Ebola, Asian flu, and many more. In fact, there are 5 or 10 waiting around the corner as I talk to you. What was more surprising with COVID was how how poor our global cooperation was, our global solidarity to put vaccines together, how countries shut their own borders to look after their self-interest when we knew we could better deal with it if we would work together. It cost us millions more. It started to make people realize that the cost of COVID, which has been $17 trillion in Europe and the US alone, a 25 trillion loss over the 10 years in GDP alone, that the cost of our inability to deal with these challenges is infinitely higher than what it would cost us to do something about it. It started to make us realize that this is, in fact, rapidly turning to one of the bigger opportunities. That's why you see the financial market moving into ESG, making these pledges. They are not easily moved by morality, but they are certainly smart to see an economic opportunity. It has made us realize that we can't have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. It has made us see that biodiversity, human health, climate change, the economy, the racial dimensions with the tragic death of George Floyd, that they are all linked together. It has made us realize once more that vulnerable people pay a disproportionate a price for our shortcomings. Women, 2 times higher job loss than men. Vulnerable people, no access to healthcare systems. Poor people living around coal factories dying 12 years earlier. And the list goes on. Still 1.7 billion people, no safety net around them and in temporary unprotected jobs. So all of a sudden, we see a different behavior. At the time of the COVID crisis, about 20% of the global emissions countries made commitments to be net zero. Now we have 90% of the emissions covered by countries making net zero commitments. We had less than 1,000 companies setting science-based targets, say below 5 degrees. Now we have over 3,000 companies that have set those targets. The financial market has started to move. So we've seen a fundamental shift in the right direction. Sure, we have some short-term challenges. We now have the energy crisis coming from the Ukraine, obviously, and from Russia, where we were too energy dependent, frankly, because we've moved too slow to this green conversion. We see a food crisis where, again, some people are advocating unsustainable practices when we have to, really replant forests instead of cutting down more forest, if I keep it simple. So vested interest, short-term political pressure might push you temporarily to a different direction. But it is for us collectively to speak up and to work together and say, no, there is a better trajectory. We don't have to compromise. If we don't attack climate change at the same time, we have millions, in fact, hundreds of millions more victims not far from now. This trajectory of going back to where we came from isn't there. And frankly, 95% of the CEOs understand that. So we need to just be sure that we create enough of a critical mass of companies that keep our politicians honest as well, and hopefully continue to accelerate the move in the right direction. Which is exactly one of the reasons we created Imagine, which is a collective of CSOs by industry sector across the value chain. We had about 20 CEOs meet this weekend at Urgency to discuss the Ukrainian food crisis and its consequences. And we're working with the IUCN, the IRC, the World Food Programme, and Save the Children and other humanitarian organizations together to deal with this immediate crisis, to see where the stocks are globally, to replant and provide opportunities in a sustainable way to deal with the shortages where they are, to move in an accelerated way to regenerative agriculture. These are the type of responses that we should have. In Europe, you see the same thing, where many countries now have made more money available to accelerate the move to green energy and make us less energy dependent. We've seen that being energy dependent is giving enormous shocks to our economic system and also leads to many of the geopolitical issues that we're dealing with, not the least the tragedies unfolding close by. So in summary, Tensie, it should be a further commitment, a determination to actually accelerate this path of transition that we're currently on.
Thank you, Paul. Unfortunately, sadly, we are at time. It is always so inspiring to talk with you, and I know that that's true for all of our audience members. I encourage everyone watching this to buy Paul's book. And if you are a CEO and not involved with Imagine, to get involved with Imagine. And Paul, thanks again for your leadership, your commitment, your passion for this work.
Thank you, Tensie, and thank you for what you are doing. And if there are unanswered questions, as we talked before, send them my way and I'll try to get back to you. I really appreciate what everybody is doing. I'm sure that you have a selected audience that doesn't need to be convinced, but I still want to thank you. These are not easy times and they require the best of us. People's lives depend on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul. See you later.
Yeah.